Hello, I'm Kaiser and welcome to Moose Reads. Before I get started, I want to say that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I dislike a book, it is not a reflection on the author, and it is not a reflection on people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Today, I will be reviewing A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foz Meadows. It is the first book in the Tithenai Chronicles. This is a queer fantasy romance. The description says, Velison Vin Aro never planned to marry at all, let alone a girl from neighboring Tithenai. When an ugly confrontation reveals his preference for men, Vel fears he's ruined the diplomatic union before it can even begin. But while his family is ready to disown him, the Tithenai envoy has a different solution, for Vel to marry his former intended's brother instead. Caethari Eduria always knew he might end up in a political marriage, but his sudden betrothal to a man from Ralia, where such relationships are forbidden, comes as a shock. With an unknown faction willing to kill to end their new alliance, Vel and Kay have no choice but to trust each other. Survival is one thing, but love, as both will learn, is quite another. 5 stars, would absolutely recommend. This is a reread. I read it for the first time last May and fell completely in love with it. The sequel came out at the end of 2023, and I wanted to read it, but had forgotten enough important details that I felt a reread was necessary. It also helps with consistency for the channel, so bonus. Content warnings for rape and attempted suicide, both of which are rather explicitly on the page. So pretty much at the very beginning of this book, Vel gets raped by his ex-boyfriend. One of the things I really appreciated about this book is that it doesn't just use this as tragic backstory and then dump it once the romance starts developing. It very much engages with how Vel is affected by his rape and never treats it dismissively. I also really appreciate that Meadows calls a spade a spade. In the course of being raped, Vel's body reacts pleasurably to what his rapist is doing, and the act doesn't involve penetration, but it is still always explicitly called out as rape. Vel does struggle at times with questions of whether he can really call it rape when he climaxed and whether he has a right to complain when it could have been much, much worse. But I think these are very realistic feelings a person in his situation would have, and while he might have conflicted feelings about it, Meadows never once leaves it as a question for the reader. Both of these are things that I don't feel I could say about a lot of other books. Often a character being raped or nearly raped is merely a source of drama, mentioned for a chapter or two and then forgotten. And there are definitely a lot more books, and people, that make excuses for rape when the victim experiences physical pleasure. It was nice seeing a book engage with the topic honestly. I also really love the romance in this book. When thinking about what I wanted to say for this review, it occurred to me that this is essentially fake dating, which is one trope I go nuts for. They are actually married within very little time of meeting, but because Vel is experiencing trauma and wasn't really given a choice in the matter, they are both very much approaching their relationship as two people pretending to like each other. Once they both start catching feelings, neither one is prepared to either admit to it or to ask their husband to clarify his feelings. Kay doesn't want to force himself on Vel, either directly or by making him feel pressured or coerced. So he's not about to say anything or ask for anything. Vel, on the other hand, isn't sure how much he can really offer to Kay while dealing with the trauma of recently being raped, so he doesn't want to make overtures that might not go anywhere. It all works together to create the exact kind of emotional turmoil that I love in my romance. It's delightful. But this book isn't all romance all the time. It has a very solid balance between the confusing, fluffy feelings and the actual plot. I thought the plot was great too. Without getting into details, I saw one part of the big reveal coming, but was more or less blindsided by the other. On the second read-through, I was able to look for the clues that I missed, and they were absolutely there. They were just very subtle. Also, while I wouldn't necessarily say this book has a strong cast of side characters, it does have a pretty good one. There are plenty of other characters who get enough development to be interesting, but the only one who really makes an impact is Markle, Vel's valet and friend who happens to be mute. Markle is a fantastic character, as well as the protagonists, and I like both the established relationship between him and Vel, and the relationship being built between him and Kay. That's it for no spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, now is the time to pause or close the video. For everyone else, let's talk details. I didn't really understand the thing with Killick. He's Vel's rapist ex, and he shows up again later to reinitiate his relationship with Vel, thinking he's married to a woman and therefore still available for an affair, and too arrogant to consider what he did as rape. There are some technicalities involving a Tithenai envoy that mean that he can be tried in Tithenai, but he would either have to be publicly tried or Kay's father would have to invoke Tiern's privilege to punish him privately, but would most likely report both the crime and punishment as a matter of record. Vel isn't prepared to make his rape public, so he doesn't want that. Instead, he and Kay devise an alternate punishment where he is branded as a rapist in accordance with Rallian custom. But they still perform this punishment under the guise of Tiern's privilege, so I wasn't entirely sure how it was different. It didn't make sense to me, but it's possible I just missed some nuance that makes it clear. I liked the non-romance half of the plot, but there was one major thing that annoyed me. At some point, while talking through the things the assassin has done since Vel arrived in Kikatai, the boys realize that they might be using spelled artifacts rather than their own magic. To this end, they visit a friend of Kay's to ask if he knows who might sell that kind of gear, and eventually he gives them the name of a merchant. When they talk to said merchant, he gives them the name of a man who supposedly purchased all the gear they're asking about, and the man happens to be a corrupt official who has already blundered rather spectacularly during the course of the investigation. He seems like a viable suspect, so he's brought in for questioning. He's a very obvious red herring, and it doesn't take the boys long to determine that, while he's certainly guilty of many things, assassination isn't one of them. Vel asks him who would want to frame him for it, and he has no idea, but he, reasonably, suggests that whoever pointed them in his direction is probably suspicious. But the boys don't even blink at this suggestion. This is the only thing I can point to in the entire book that just frustrated me. Even if they had no other reason to suspect the merchant, it does seem worth at least a cursory follow-up, but they just don't seem to care. So the first time around, I was fairly convinced he was in on it, and sure enough, when they go see him again for unrelated reasons, he is conspiring with the big bad. Seems like it should have been at least mildly obvious, but maybe that's just me. But with regards to the actual big bad, I just didn't see it coming. I spent most of the book trying to figure out who it could be, with no real luck. They set up a pretty decent red herring elsewhere that I had considered, but as soon as someone suggested him as a suspect, I was pretty confident it wasn't him. I honestly spent most of the book mildly suspicious of the wrong sister, which is kind of hilarious. I'm pretty sure Lacia didn't cross my mind even once, so either it was very subtly done, or I just really missed the clues. I did feel like Lacia's motive was a little silly. It seemed pretty obvious from the moment Kay's grandmother explained the political deadlock she was in with Kay's father that she, at least, preferred Lacia as an heir. Kay very clearly and repeatedly states that he doesn't have any interest in politics, so the idea that he would be favored to inherit seems ridiculous. I can maybe understand where his grandmother is coming from. She at least has reason to suspect his father might favor him, but it seems silly that Lacia assumed she wasn't being considered. All the same, I can't really say this is a flaw in the story. People are going to people, no matter how silly it is. So, while I think it should have been obvious, I can see how Lacia might convince herself otherwise. That's all I have to say about A Strange and Stubborn Endurance. If you liked this video, I hope you'll watch more in the future. Thanks for watching this one. Bye!